Senate, I want to ask you this question. I've had some people on here speak about nuclear power. You just brought that up a little while
Yeah.
ago. And I agree with you on the Fukushima. There's been, overreaction. Even in this country, there's not a lot of, they talk about how they're, the Green New Deal, but there's no talk about nuclear energy and how it is clean energy if with the new way of doing it. The Fukushima way, that's in the past. We've learned a lot. The world has learned a lot about that. I've been told that a lot of countries don't want to really push nuclear power because if they do push forward on nuclear power, they're thinking that that will be the other countries in the world will create, nuclear warheads and other things. Do you believe that? Is that factual? Is that, not true?
Well, you do worry about proliferation of nuclear power. That is a legitimate concern. That U.S. India nuclear civilian nuclear pact was had to be done because they had not signed on to that non-proliferation agreement. But when I went to India, the air was so awful in New Delhi and all. I said, if you like the smell of burning garbage and tires, you just love the air quality here. Now, their quality of coal in India is a very low grade coal. It's not low sulfur. It's not American low sulfur coal, and they have to import. They have their own, but then the others they have to import. They have such large swaths of literally hundreds of millions of people without electricity in India. So to me, one of the solutions for them would be nuclear power. Now, to cooperate and share that nuclear information with them, you have to have a completely separate agreement because they had not signed the Non-Proliferation Pact. However, there are countries that had signed the Non-Proliferation Agreement and ignore it. India never was proliferating. They weren't selling any sort of information to North Korea or Iran or any of these belligerent, dangerous terrorist countries. So nuclear, I think, is part of the mix for the future. It's very interesting. It's perfect that you want to ask about this because in Virginia, the Governor Youngkin has come up with an energy policy for the U.S. Now, let's put this in a larger context. In nuclear, and I know this is blasphemous to say this, but we can learn from the French. The French are the very best in the entire world in nuclear power. They get about 75% of their electricity from nuclear. The reason people don't like nuclear is the fear of high level radioactive waste, and that they'll be there for 15,000 years. And we don't have a national repository. So every one of the 102 nuclear power plants in the US are also holding high level radioactive waste. The low level radioactive waste, the gloves, the boots, the coats, goggles, and all that, those are put to repositories. In Virginia, we're in the Southeastern Compact and they get sent to Barnwell, South Carolina. There's not a county in Virginia that would want to have low level radioactive waste. Fortunately, Barnwell, South Carolina looks at it as a commodity and they take it. Now, you could think of high level radioactive waste, which is obviously much more than the gloves and shoes and so forth. So, what the French do is they reprocess the spent fuel. They keep using it, reusing it time after time after time till the radioactivity is so low that they can vitrify it or encase it in glass. It's much safer. And the half-life is maybe 120 years rather than 15,000 years or 1,500 years. So that's something that we need to learn. Then here's the other thing. I'm here in Virginia Beach, next to the largest naval base in the world. We have nuclear reactors operating all over the place, and they're in submarines and they're in aircraft carriers. Our aircraft carriers are nuclear powered, and many of our newer submarines are nuclear powered. Now, what those are small modular reactors. Governor Youngkin, and I was at his announcement just 2 weeks ago in Southwest Virginia on an abandoned coal mine area where they want to start building these small modular reactors. I've been trying to find out, for example, if you take the USS Ronald Reagan, nuclear powered, if you hook that up to the grid, how many houses could that service? And I've never been able to get an answer. So they have these Virginia Tech nuclear physicists and so forth there at this announcement. I said, all right, how much could you get off of it? And I got an answer, and I'm going to read it to you from Jonathan Link. He's for the Center of Neutrino Physics, Department of Physics, Virginia Tech. Said, greetings, Governor Allen. It was nice to talk to you after the governor's event on Friday. Your question about the small modular reactor's power in terms of households and cities got me thinking. So I did a little research and calculation because I want to say, you don't want to say how many megawatts, no one knows what 3 megawatts is versus 30 megawatts versus kilowatts. And I said, just say the number, and then you can say it's the size of the city of Richmond or the size of the city of Portsmouth or whatever. So he said, although there are different sizes for these small modular reactors, and they may have different power output, the leading technology is that of NuScale, NuScale, for which the module is 77 megawatts. A typical Virginia household uses 18,000 kilowatt hours per year. I wish we personally would use that little. We use way more than that, which means at any rate, the one small modular reactor could power 37,000 homes, which is just a bit larger than the city of Portsmouth. The estimate does not include businesses in Portsmouth, so you could say just one small modular reactor could power all the homes in Portsmouth, Virginia. And a single plant of these are 12 modules, could you just expand that 12 times that. So if you had a place like that, that could power 300,000 or more homes, and using what is can be done very safely, very efficiently, and with no emissions. And so if you want emission free with no air emissions, reliable baseload power, it's got to be nuclear. The rest of these, the offshore wind, the nonsense, the idiocy of this offshore wind in Virginia. This is from the nuclear is smart. So is natural gas. Offshore wind, they want to build 176 wind turbines 27 miles off the coast of Virginia Beach. They put 2 of these platforms out there as tests to see how much wind is there and can you do it. And they said, well, they operated 42% of the time. And so they said, we want to guarantee. The Public Utility Commission said, we want to guarantee. Dominion said, no, we can't guarantee it. We don't know, what the weather will be like. So we don't want to do that. So the point is they're going to
hold on. Dominion Energy wants to put this in place. Was this like a bill passed by the legislature?
No, it's all guaranteed because Virginia has a stupid clean energy plan that was passed when the Democrats were in complete. It's the Green New Deal for Virginia. And so Dominion, and you're a captive customer. It's not as if you have a choice. Utilities are monopolies. And I'd love to get electricity from the Powell Valley Electric Co-op, but that's not practical. So you're stuck. And so the ones that are going to get stuck with having to pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars more in their power bills are the people. But for something that works 42% of the time, that would be like, Rob, if you went to a car dealer and they said, hey, we have this new expensive experimental car, and but we don't want to guarantee you, but we think it'll only operate 3 out of 7 days of the week. Would you want to buy a car that, and you could say, we don't know what those 3 days are that it'll work, and maybe the days it's not working, you won't want to drive. Heck, no one would buy a car that operates 3 out of 7 days a week. So why force this on captive customers? My view is, if it's such a great idea, and we own Dominion stock, so this is not to my interest, is that Dominion shareholders ought to be held accountable and bear some of this risk. Now, if they had to bear the risk of this not working, they would not find this to be a reasonable and prudent expenditure of $10 billion, which is the biggest expenditure Dominion's had for anything, even more than their nuclear power plants, that in my view are great and ought to be relicensed if they can operate safely in the future.
Let's move on to the election. So it looked like the Democrats peaked too early. They looked like they were really going away. They were never going to win the House, between us and everybody listening. There was no chance of that. But they looked like they were going to win the Senate, whether it was 51 or 52 or even 50. Right now, it looks like they're probably going to lose the Senate, but it's still, very tight. Why do you feel like they peaked too early? Let's start with that question.
Okay, really great way of looking at things, Rob. I think that going into this election, I'm going to look at this election pre-Hobbs and post-Hobbs decision. The Hobbs decision, as you know, was the Supreme Court saying that abortion parameters will be left to the states, knocking out Roe versus Wade. Prior to that decision, the Democrats were pretty disconsolate. They were not motivated. Republicans couldn't wait to vote. I think the Hobbs decision really fired up the Democrat base. And they were getting some votes because people were fearful that decision, it was being mischaracterized, in my view, as this is the end of abortion rights. No, it's not. The decision was that the parameters or the guardrails on abortion would be decided by the people in the states. And so you had folks, and these were independent voters, suburban women and others, young people who thought, oh, well, we think women ought to have a right to choose and so forth. And then I think what people have seen is that, wait a second, this really is up to the states. And it is an issue for state legislative races and governors' races. But for the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives, most of them are saying this is not, I'm not going to Washington to change abortion laws in Virginia or Florida or Pennsylvania or Nevada or whatever state. And that's going to be left to the people of the state to sort that out. And so that when people are seeing, oh, all right, these races are not going to change that, and they also don't see the laws changing that much. Now, in some states they have, and you saw that referendum in Kansas, where they said, no, we do not want this extreme anti-abortion, pro-life, whatever term you want to use, position. But what's bothering people the most is the high cost of gasoline. Every time they fill up their car, every time they go to the grocery store, they say milk is up 25%. The packages they're getting are smaller and cost more. Everything's gone up in price. The inflation issue is such a truly kitchen table, pocketbook issue that folks understand. The other issue that has really come to fore is crime. And this is people not feeling safe in their areas. Some of these cities are just shooting galleries, and people are having a backlash against this defund the police or sue the police or this criminal apologist point of view. And this is becoming a big issue. You saw that with Adams winning that ranked choice voting in the mayor city of New York City, where the Democrats had some really, really far left.
Just to jump in quick, I just interviewed somebody from the New York Conservative Party earlier this morning. It's like a subsector of the Republican Party.
Yeah, I know. They're a great batch of folks.
Yeah, and I interviewed the leader there. And I told him, I said, what is going on with Adams? I mean, first, I don't know if you heard
he's been a disappointment. But
he's a stooge for the liberals. Go ahead.
Yes, he is. But he ran as a former police officer, and that's who the Democrats nominated. Now, this New York governor's race is a tight race. And the reason it's a tight race is high energy prices. They're against fracking. When right across the border in Pennsylvania, they are producing natural gas. And this crime issue, it is a major, major issue in New York. And that, I think, can have an effect. And that's why it's a close race. Oregon is a close race for a Republican governor's race people saw this lawlessness and looting and all that going on in Oregon, and so the Republican has a chance there.
Yeah, but the Republican is
An issue-
benefiting. Yeah, but the Republican is benefiting their senator because there's a third party person that's taken about 13 or 14% of the voters from the Democrat too.
Okay, good point. Good
Yeah.
point. Still,
I'm just being truthful.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
not
no,
trying to
that's
put-
fine.
Yeah.
Look, Rob, no, thank you for bringing that point up.
Right.
But it's become an issue in the Wisconsin Senate race. and
Right,
the
with
Governor's
Barnes,
race
yeah.
with Kenosha. It's an issue in Michigan. It is, again, and then you get a state like Arizona where border security
Yeah.
is a big, big issue, obviously, there, and the crime that comes from it, and the Democrats thinking that you can have an open border. And so, so that the public safety issue or crime issue in some states is a big issue. And it's breaking to the Republicans because folks remember all these anti-police, anti-law enforcement positions that the Democrats have had for the last 2 or 3 years. And they're hearing, heck, I remember going with Jason Miyares in his attorney general race last year with Democrat sheriffs said, this party's left us. We're going to vote for you. They were having a hard time retaining. People were retiring early, and they're having a heck of a hard time everywhere. It's not unique to Virginia. It's a whole country where they're having a hard time recruiting people into law enforcement who want to have the compensation. They also want to be appreciated for the dangerous, essential work that they do.
So what would you tell people that are Democrats, but maybe they're fed up? They're more of the JFK Democrat. They
we
and
want JFK wanted strong national defense and wanted to cut taxes.
Right.
And JFK, I think these days would probably be would probably not be in the Democratic Party. He may be an independent or whatever, but his positions, his policy positions were generally middle right of center. Bernie Sanders has actually been just scolding Democrats lately, saying you don't keep talking about elections or whatever democracy says.
They talk about trans, all this.
But this is Bernie. This is why some people may not agree with his prescriptions. I don't.
Right, but he tells the truth about a lot of things.
Exactly. He's got it. He genuinely believes what he's saying. And again, you may not agree. I don't agree with his prescriptions, but what he's saying, he's identifying genuine problems and trying to tell the Democrats, stop talking about all this. People care about crime. This is a real issue. Or they really do care about the cost of groceries or gasoline prices going up. So just don't think that you can be in your echo chamber with these elitist, condescending points of view. I think people need to always question authority. And this pandemic was an example of people not questioning authority. And it bothered me in Virginia, this timid acquiescence to our governor, the former governor, with his halting governance. And to me, it's just abhorrent that anybody in government would ever declare that some business is non-essential.
Well, he was a Hillary Clinton stooge too, and Bill Clinton stooge, I should say, more so than Hillary.
Bill Clinton. I'm going to say this about Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was a very smart.
I was just saying that Terry McAuliffe was a Bill Clinton stooge. He was a DNC chairman. You know.
Oh yeah. I know Terry, and we're personal friends, and we have wonderful debates with one another. Generally disagreeing on about 80% of the things, but this was Governor Northam. This was not McAuliffe, who was.
That's right. I'm sorry.
Terry was running for governor again, so this was Northam, and of course, being a Democrat, he had to be hysterical. And you can always tell the Democrats that wear masks and Republicans are not wearing masks, and the most devout Democrats were wearing 2 masks. When you'd see people, and in fact, we just found that they had prohibited having amplified music on the beach. You could not throw frisbees on the beach. You could not have large coolers on the beach, as if that transmits the disease. looking at this, the states that stayed open, like Tennessee and Texas and Georgia, Florida, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Nebraska, those states versus the lockdown states, there is no discernible difference in death rates.
Yeah.
Where there is a difference is in jobs. Virginia is finally catching up to where they were pre-pandemic. These other states that stayed open, they have 10, 15, 20, 30% more jobs in those states than they had pre-pandemic. The other big difference is the education of children. The children, especially elementary and middle school students, need in-person education. They can't be watching a screen. Their attention span is 30 seconds as it is. And they have lost crucial education, and there needs to be, and this should not be a part of, this is a mistake, but not just point and say this is a mistake and isn't this terrible what's been done to young people. Is there needs to be a concerted effort across this whole country, and it should not be partisan, is we got to get these kids back up to speed in learning how to read and write and speak the English language, learn mathematics. And it may be they have to have an extra hour of school. Maybe it's going to be summer school. We cannot go into next year, next fall. I'm talking about 2023, with these kids still a year or two behind. If they get into middle school and they haven't learned, or high school, and they haven't learned what they're supposed to learn, they're going to be disconsolate. They're going to be despondent. They're going to be lost. It'll be terrible for them, and it'll be terrible for the environment of the schools. So these states that have these problems, including Virginia, need to have a concerted effort to get these kids the education and individualized, personalized education. Some may have done better than others, and that's where testing and accountability comes in. But it's really disastrous for these young people, and that ends up being disastrous for future generations in our country.
So let me ask you this. You know, a lot of politicos around the country. I'm sure you've been traveling around the country. I know that personally. You know, meeting with regular people, the politicos, around the country. What are they saying are the bellwethers? And is it going to be a Republican wave or a tsunami? Because there's a difference.
Good question. I think it'll be a wave. I was looking at it at 2026. There's two polls that I think are really most important that don't get into personalities. One is the direction of the country. The polls on the direction of the country are just overwhelmingly, at best, it's about 30% think we're on the right track, and generally 70% consider we're on the wrong track. And whoever the incumbent party is, suffers if people think the country's on the wrong track. The others for President Biden, and his approval ratings are around 40, 41%, depending on the state. They're not as bad as President Bush, George W. Bush's, which was about 36% in the 2006 midterms. But still, that's bad. So anytime you look at a poll, and if you have an incumbent who's under 48%, they're in trouble, because the undecided voters, if someone's at 45%, and we have that here in the 2nd Congressional District here in coastal Virginia, there's a poll and has them 45% tied, 8% supposedly undecided. Those undecided, if they're not for the incumbent now, they're not going to be for them. With Biden on approval and people thinking the economy's going in the wrong direction, and the country's in the wrong direction, and crime and schools and all the rest. So I think that the Republicans ultimately, for a combination of factors, you have Georgia. I think Kemp's doing great in his governor's race. That'll help Herschel Walker. Mike DeWine, governor of Ohio, is doing great. I think that'll help J.D. Vance in the Ohio race. I think New Hampshire, our candidate, is not as strong as he could have been. Sununu is going to win big. I don't know if it is a tsunami, we'll win New Hampshire, but I think that we're going to pick up Nevada.
Yeah,
we're going to pick up Nevada. We'll pick up ultimately in overtime in Georgia with the way Georgia operates. Georgia will go into
what about
overtime.
Arizona? Because that's a tough race.
Now I think the governor.
Yeah, it looks like Kari Lake is going to win that. She's very strong. She's good with the media as a former media
Correct.
personality. And
And
this the
and
woman
her
won't debate. The Karen Hobbs, the
exactly. She strikes me as someone, and I've watched it. My brother, one of my brothers lives in Arizona, so I'm watching that race, and I was for someone else for the nomination. I wasn't for Lake, but Lake has come off very well, and her opponent seems like she's running for vice president of her high school class. She's just so weak. You want a governor who's strong and projects, and she's just so weak and refuses to debate. And so I think Lake will win. I don't know if it'll be enough to carry if we have a wave, a good sized wave, we'll end up winning that Senate seat. And I think the Republicans could have nominated someone better in that Republican one than they did. But that's, if the Republicans get to 53, they got to hold Pennsylvania. And I think in Pennsylvania, Fetterman being against energy, which means jobs. I think Oz, even though he wasn't the strongest candidate,
right.
Republicans could have nominated there. Still, he could eke out that win against Fetterman. And so you end up holding all those seats and then pick up these others. You could get to 53. But you'd have to get to 53. You gotta hold Ohio and Pennsylvania, and I think we're going to hold Florida and New Hampshire, not New Hampshire, North Carolina,
right. Yeah, those
and then Iowa, and then pick up the pickups would be Georgia and Nevada. Arizona would be a bonus to get to 53. If we had nominated a better candidate, I think Republicans could have won New Hampshire, especially with Sununu's strength as governor.
In Arizona,
Washington's close. Colorado, the great candidate in Colorado, but
Trump went against that guy, and he's losing some support now because
I wish President Trump, and it's not just him, some of his folks would remember. We started with Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan had an 11th commandment to not speak ill of fellow Republicans. It is hard enough to be a Republican, at least for me. In Virginia, where we're a minority, we only can win by getting 55% of the independents. And so to have Republicans sniping at one another, and the Democrats, this would apply to any organization, but gosh, you have enough to fight the people who you're really in opposition to, that you don't need all this sniping and criticizing. And I wish President Trump would remember Reagan's 11th commandment. Yeah. But that's not his style.
Just to go back to Arizona, Kari Lake, that was a Trump pick, and so was Oz, both former media people, just like Trump. And that was who he puts in. A lot of these people were media people, and he put those people in. They know how to work the cameras. They know what to say. They're very savvy. I really like Kari Lake. I know who you're talking about, because I actually interviewed somebody in that governor's race, the businesswoman. I know that's right. who you I forget her name now.
I do, but I know
Ducey endorsed
Robinson
or Rob Roberson or something.
Yeah, Roberson or whatever. And Ducey's been an outstanding governor. He's done a fantastic job.
I was surprised that Ducey didn't run for a Senate. I know that Trump is not a Ducey person, but I was surprised Ducey didn't run for Senate. As far as that goes.
He would have won easily.
Yeah, well, who knows? Let's end with the rapid fire questions, just to go off this. A quick question. You talked about Virginia Beach. Obviously, that's your neck of the woods. Close race. Are those the races you're looking at as bellwethers to what's going to really happen in November? If it's an early night in Virginia Beach, in Virginia in general, that, Republicans will really clean up?
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at things. The second congressional district of Virginia, which is Virginia Beach, Eastern Shore, Southeastern Virginia. Watch that race. If Republicans win that, that's a good sign. If we don't win it, if Republicans do not win it, the Democrats are going to be really happy. Then there's another close race in Virginia, the 7th congressional district. Watch that. That's Yesli Vega running against Abigail Spanberger, an incumbent, who's a kind of moderate Democrat. She's blasted the defund the police idiocy of the Democrats, and she wants to get rid of Nancy Pelosi as speaker and has actually voted against Nancy Pelosi. So, but she had to move with the redistricting. So we'll see how that goes. The others to watch on election night will be Pennsylvania. That'll be a key race to watch, that Senate race. It may take well into the night to figure out who's won that Senate race. I think Shapiro will win the governor's race fairly easily in Pennsylvania. Florida, you have 2 time zones, so that'll be an hour later. Kentucky comes in early, but there's no Rand Paul's going to win easy there. Then you look at Ohio. That'll be an interesting one to watch.
Well, let me ask you about Ohio with the J.D. Vance. Sorry to interrupt. Let me ask you about Ohio with the J.D. Vance race, because, Tim Ryan, obviously he's going against the Biden head waves. The race seems like it's close as far as the polling goes. We can't really trust the polls. We saw that back in 2016. With that said, Tim Ryan voted against Nancy Pelosi, actually ran against Nancy Pelosi. Yeah. So he's not really, he's with the program. He's voted with Biden 90 some odd % of the time, but then he does do some things with Trump or against the Democrats. It's a really Republican state, though. Trump's won by 8 points in the past 2 elections. And I don't really see that going Democrat, but maybe you see something that I don't.
All the things that you just said, Rob, are correct. And you have Mike DeWine running for re-election,
right, and he's extremely popular,
and he's winning by 10 or 15%. It's just like Kemp with Herschel Walker in Georgia. I just can't imagine people voting for Kemp and then voting for Warnock in the Senate race. And so, but Georgia, you got to get, and there's a libertarian or something running also, right, which is going to keep anybody from getting 50%. So Georgia, in that state, to get elected, you need over 50%. So there'll be a runoff. That's why I say Georgia will go in overtime. Another interesting race to watch early on will be the governor's race up in Michigan. That has become a close race with Tudor Dixon against Governor Whitmer. And so that could be an indication when you're looking at, the Eastern time zone votes early on in the night. So it'll be Pennsylvania, Virginia congressional races. Heck, the race you're talking about in Rhode Island, your congressional race in Rhode Island.
The Republican is up by 8 points, Alan Fung. And, obviously, Rhode Island is extremely Democratic state. Not only that, the district that he's running in, there hasn't been a Republican that's been elected to that congressional seat in 33 years. This would be a huge thing for the state. If that happens, we know that the Republicans, I think, are really going to do a swamp, especially if he wins by 8 to 10 points, because that's been a Democratic seat since, for 33 years.
And also the great thing to watch will be the New York governor's race too.
Right.
That's going to get plenty of media attention with all the media up in New York City. And so if that ends up being a close race, that's a heck of an indication